In today's lesson, we're going to look at terrorism and just what the word terror means. The words terror, terrorism, and terrorist seem synonymous with the Arab-Israeli conflict. We see and read continually of so-called terrorist acts, usually attributed to Palestinian groups, but sometimes preceded by the word state when Israeli actions are referred to. Why do we use these terms? And what do they mean? The modern use of terror in the Arab-Israeli conflict emerged from the Six-Day War of 1967. The devastating Arab defeat and the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip inspired the PLO, which was too weak to fight an orthodox struggle, to adopt terrorist tactics. Other pro-Palestinian groups imposed their demands on a global audience by hijacking airliners and kidnapping Israeli athletes at the 1972 Olympic Games in Munich. In recent years, Palestinian terrorism has taken the form of young people strapping bombs to their bodies and exploding them in streets, markets, buses and cafes crowded with Israelis. In turn, the Israelis, despite the likelihood and reality of civilian casualties, have destroyed homes and orchards, blockaded towns and assassinated suspected Palestinian terrorist leaders using bombs, missiles and helicopter gunships. No one definition of terrorism has gained universal acceptance. United States President Ronald Reagan's 1985 description of terrorists as misfits, Looney Tunes and squalid criminals is clearly inadequate. 12 different United Nations conventions or treaties on terrorism have been created piecemeal over the past few decades, but there is still no universal consensus on the definition of terrorism. The United States FBI uses the following definition. Terrorism is the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives. The key words in this definition are unlawful and civilian population. The definition presumes there is a lawful use of force. That implies generally that the force used by states or countries is legitimate, but that forces used by subnational groups is not, and is therefore terrorism. The definition also assumes that states use force against states rather than innocent civilians. The qualitative definition of terrorism is in the eye of the beholder. It's commonplace to observe that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. One's perspective on terrorism depends on the interests involved and the political priorities at the time. As Professor Noam Chomsky of Massachusetts Institute of Technology has noted, the world looks very different depending on whether you're holding the lash or whether you're being whipped by it. In reality, the use of all force imparts terror, and much of the force used in war is designed, in part at least, to intimidate civilian populations. The German bombing of London and other British cities and British bombing of Dresden and other German cities during World War II and the American bombing of Cambodia during the Vietnam War, while perhaps technically lawful, were still all acts of terror.